We will continue talking about the principles of epidemiology applied to the study of medication use. Measuring morbidity, learning objectives. Learn measures of morbidity, understand elements of cumulative incidence, understand elements of incidence rate, calculate incidence. Morbidity. What we mean by morbidity? So if we look at this figure, we will see the natural history of disease. The disease starts with onset, followed by symptoms. The patient will seek medical care, get diagnosed and maybe hospitalized, get a treatment. After treatment, the patient either will be cured of the disease will be controlled, like chronic disease, diabetes, hypertension, or the patient will have disability, for example, stroke, or the patient will die. These are the outcomes of any disease status. How we measure morbidity? Morbidity is defined as any departure, subjective or objective, from a state of physiological or psychological well-being. Two types to measure morbidity. We have incidence and prevalence. Incidence measure the occurrence of new cases of a disease or the onset of disease, while prevalence measures the number of cases of a disease already present in the population. As you can see, prevalence, cases already present, and incidence, new cases that are added to the prevalence to calculate now and upgrade the prevalence. Incidence elements. What are the elements to calculate incidence? Incidence measures the occurrence of new cases of the disease. The cases shouldn't have the disease before. Third, if a disease, for example, occurred more than once during a specified period of time, the incidence only measures the first occurrence of the disease. مثال، إذا بدنا نحسب الانسيدنس للكانديدا infection bloodstream candidiasis هلا خلال سنة معينة، إذا المريض صار عنده الإصابة مرتين خلال هاي السنة بس بنحسب الفيرست occurrence، الإصابة الأولى، ما بنحسب الإصابة الثانية. To continue, the denominator of incidence calculation should include all persons who are at risk for developing the disease of interest, who are often referred to as the population at risk. يعني بدنا نحسب الانسيدنس للبريست كانسر. population at risk في هاي الحالة بتكون كل السيدات فوق 18 سنة اللي هم population at risk. بدنا نحسب الريسك of prostate cancer، الانسيدنس of prostate cancer، population at risk كل الميلز فوق 18 سنة. اوكي، this is how we define population at risk. Incidence. For a common disease, incidence may have expressed as percentage or number of new cases per 1,000 population, whereas for rare conditions, incidence is usually expressed with a larger denominator, for example, per 100,000 population. So the multiplier that we use in calculating incidence depend on the how the disease commonly to occur. For common disease, the multiplier can be as low as 1,000. However, for rare disease, we need larger multipliers. We need 100,000 to get the calculation correct. Example. Suppose that we wish to calculate the incidence of prostate cancer in the US in 2009. We could find the number of new prostate cancer cases registered during 2009. We divide them by the total number of men in the US population in 2009 because women are not at risk for developing prostate cancer. Cumulative incidence. Now for incidence, we have two types. We have cumulative incidence and incidence rate. Cumulative incidence measures the proportion of the population at risk that develops the disease of interest over a specified period of time. All persons in the denominator must be observed for the entire duration of follow-up. We are waiting until they have the disease. The choice of time period is arbitrary, though a period of 1 year is often used in reporting cumulative incidence. cumulative incidence is a measure of risk in a group of people. Cumulative incidence is primarily used in fixed populations when in-migration equal out-migration and there are no loss to follow up. So we observe patients for a whole year and see by the end of the year who gets the disease, who gets the disease of interest. This is how we calculate cumulative incidence. If you look at the equation, you will see number of new cases of a disease during a specified period divided by number of persons at risk for developing the disease during that period multiplied by a multiplier. Let's look at this example. There were 80 obese people attending a one-year educational program, and among them, 60 didn't have type 2 diabetes mellitus at the start of the program in January 2009. All 80 people were followed throughout 2009. At the end of the program in December 2009, 6 of the 60 participants had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. This results in a cumulative incidence of type 2 diabetes among those without diabetes at the start of the program of 10% or 100 per 1,000 participants during the 1-year period. So we divide 6 by 60, which is the population at risk, 60 patients. We have 6 new cases, 6 divided by 60, and then multiplied by 1,000. This is the cumulative incidence. We have another measure of incidence, which is incidence rate. Previously, in cumulative incidence, we said that we have fixed sample that's observed for entire period of the study. However, this is not always the case. In incidence rate, sometimes not every individual in the population at risk has been observed during the entire period of time for a variety of reasons. Some individuals enter the observation period after it has started, whereas others may be lost to follow up. The length of follow-up time will be different for each individual, not the same period like cumulative incidence. This is what we call it a dynamic population. So we are calculating incidence in a dynamic populations. People are coming and going at different time intervals. If we use a dynamic population, we will measure how fast new cases of disease will occur, the rapidity of disease occurrence, okay, adjusting for this variation in follow-up. So incidence rate is the number of new cases of a disease during a specified period divided by the total person time of observation in a population at risk during that period. So for each patient, we will calculate the person time, how many years, how many time points of follow-up for a specific patients, and then we add them together. If you can look at this slide, you will see that numerator of the incidence is the same as cumulative incidence, number of new cases. However, the difference is in the denominator of incidence. While in cumulative incidence, we have all population at risk. For incidence rate, we only have the person time, total person time for each individual. Look at this example. We have 5 subjects that we follow up them to measure the incidence. If you can see, for subject A, the follow-up for years, this subject A, he was followed for about 3 years. However, for subject B, also 3 years, subject C for 1 year, subject D for 5 years, and subject E for 4 years. Each patient have different time of follow-up. We calculate for each patient the period time. For example, we add now the period time, the sum for each, 3 plus 3 plus 1 plus 5 plus 4. This is the denominator, and then we divide how many cases. We have 2 cases. So 2 divided by the sum of person time multiplied by a multiplier. This is the incidence rate.